Welcome, my friends and enemies. Glad you are here. This is a fun one because I was sent this as a recommendation, I guess. That, like, hey, this would be something you're probably interested in. And I kind of am. So, I figured we could talk about it. And it's a video, so I'm going to be doing like kind of a reaction to it. But the name of the video is called Anime Has a Church Problem. Let's talk about it. Now, as somebody, for those who know me, I'm more than acquaintance level. I really enjoy science, theology, and philosophy. The massive emphasis on philosophy. But because this falls under something I enjoy, just chatting with people, I'm going to do my best to avoid any theological stuff that is going to push into religion if possible, outside of obviously the topic at hand, and more sticking to it to being in the nature of what it's related to in anime, and how it's being used. Because from what I understand, I believe this person's a Catholic, so it is what it is. But let's see if he's actually accurate, and that's more what I'm interested in. So let's jump into it.
Anime kinda has a church problem. I've picked up on a pattern and I want to know if you've seen it too. I'll be watching an anime, taking in the characters and the setting, and then bam, evil church. And I think, that's a funny coincidence. But then I put on another show and again, bam, evil church. Bam, evil church. Bam, evil church. Over and over. And I start to think to myself, something's up here and I've got to talk about it. Now, I'm no anime amateur, but when doing research into this video, there was a surprisingly large amount of anime that have this exact issue. Fullmetal Alchemist Father Cornello, Ascendance of a Bookworm's Cathedral, Attack on Titan's Church of the Walls, Fate's Fuyuki Church, and Fire Force's Holy Soul Temple, just to name a few. They're corrupt, have ulterior motives, or in some cases are entirely built on lies. So what gives? Why are there so many evil churches spread throughout the medium? I've come up with 3 different probable reasons to explain why this is happening, and I intend to set the record straight. The first reason, and probably the most fundamental, is what I call God as a problem. It's a pretty well-known trope that if you're playing a JRPG, the final boss is probably some version of God. This didn't come out of nowhere, however, and the way we got here is actually really fascinating. Have you ever heard the name Friedrich Nietzsche? No? Maybe you've heard this before. God is dead. That was Nietzsche, a German philosopher who had a strong bone to pick with Christianity as what he called a slave religion. To make a long story incredible.
Okay. That gave me a little bit to work with. So, to start, anime has a church problem. I don't know if this is necessarily true. If you look at this from the perspective of all of anime. So, I am not exactly an anime tourist or, a noob or a rando, whatever you're going to call it, normie, anything like that. I've watched my fair share, and one of the first, ironically, one of the first mangas right here that I ever purchased myself was Hellsing, which is about vampires. And you have Protestants versus Catholics, and, it was the first one he did with the cross of the 2 blades and everything. Here's the thing. Not every anime that has a church in it has the church being evil. That's the first thing that we need to recognize and organize in our heads and our thoughts. Secondly, of the churches mentioned, I don't think a single one of them, except maybe Hellsing, because Hellsing is supposed to be real world, although albeit it's very, I want to say, inaccurate, I guess, for the actual church it's supposed to be portraying, probably because they're more focused on vampires than they are on the doctrine of theology. They do quote the Bible verse or Bible verses from time to time, but it's usually taken out of context because they don't know any better when they're making it. Now, most of the churches do not have anything to do with Christianity. okay. At that point, I would ask, is it okay if they call them temples instead of churches? Is it okay if they call them cults instead of churches or temples or anything else? Like, what religious organization can you utilize that does not reflect something that you would take offense to? Because I don't know at this point. And I'm not saying that like every church has temples or every church is a cult or whatever like that. That's what I'm saying. But what is often portrayed is a person who gets into power and then is corrupted by that power, which is the principle of absolute power corrupts absolutely. Pretty easy to tell. And there are some obvious ones in anime. Granted, I can't remember every single one of them. I can visualize it in my head, but I can't remember the names of every single one of them. There's so many. Where you have a priest or a pope type character or something in which they are speaking the words of gods and blah blah blah, but in the background they're greedy, they have slaves, they're just bad people in general, and they're basically running like black market rings or something like that. Like, they're generally not good. So one thing that they usually have in common is that they aren't related to Christianity, which I think is where this guy's coming from, but we'll have to keep watching to see.
Incredibly short. Nietzsche believed that mankind had outgrown belief in God, and that in order to counter nihilism, man would have to exercise the will to power, to conquer himself, and become an Übermensch, an overman, a sort of superior version of man who is the deciding factor of reality, whom the world revolved around. Does any of this sound familiar? If not, let me zoom in for you. Nietzsche popularized 3 key concepts, which have rippled across Japanese media like you wouldn't believe. First, God is dead. Let's be clear here, Nietzsche didn't celebrate the
That's also a very misused quote for a lot of things. I'm not saying he's misusing it necessarily, but it is a very often misused quote, and what it's supposed to stand for is very different from what we would imagine.
so-called death of God. He actually worried about the emptiness that would take his place when Christianity declined in Europe. As far as he thought, Christianity had left people with a will to nothingness, desiring to leave this world for the sake of the next. Nietzsche saw this as a poison, which would need to be dealt with by totally rethinking Western philosophy and leading it away from a desire for the supernatural and the afterlife to the here and now. This is how we get our next concept, the will to power. This is power over oneself, and it's what Nietzsche thought was the main driving force in humans. You can summarize it as self-determination, the concept of actualizing one's will unto oneself or one's surroundings, and it overlaps heavily with egoism. If you're familiar with Pelagianism, it's basically a rebranding of it. But then what happens when you exercise that will to power? You get our last concept, the overman, he who overcomes emptiness and despair by creating his own values and asserting his own will to create his own reality, focusing on this life rather than the
Sounds an awful lot like relativity, or moral relativism. Bleh, sorry.
afterlife. He puts his faith in himself as the ultimate creator and relies on nothing else. Importantly, the Japanese adoption of the Overman has historically taken the form of someone who stands above the crowd, ditching the Japanese post-war collective mentality as an act of rebellion against mediocrity. So what are we left with? These 3 concepts come together to form a worldview where there is no God, and everyone who believes in God is being held back from their true potential of becoming godlike if only they would focus on this life instead of the afterlife. Obviously, this worldview isn't exactly friendly to Christianity, given that it...
Okay, hold on. This is about churches who allegedly have deities, which are gods of some shape or form. But now you're saying that the entirety of this is based around not having those deities. Do they have them or not?
originates as a deliberate departure from standard Christian teaching regarding the afterlife, submission to divine authority, and the communion of saints, and therefore, to the Japanese, God appears to be more of a problem to be overcome than a personal and loving creator. To them, he's a distant and vague figure who
It's almost like they're not Christianity, huh?
sets annoying and pointless rules for us to follow, which is in stark contrast to the Christian understanding, which is that God sets rules because he is not a god of chaos, but of order. Speaking of order, Japan isn't a huge fan of organized religion. It's no secret that the evil churches in anime tend to be very Catholic coded. For just one example,
God. They're Catholic coded because they look rich. They have cathedrals. They have. It's okay. I really want to just shout. It's not all about you. It's not always about you. First off, you're in a fantasy world where there is no Christianity God. How is it coded to be you? Like,
the gold and white color palette of these evil religious authorities is
maybe because gold is a very precious metal and is often used by religious groups. White is a symbol of purity in general, so the wealthy would have it. Okay, like,
very reminiscent of the vestments Catholic priests wear during Christmas and Easter, two of the three most attended masses every year. That said, if Christianity is around 1% of the Japanese population, why is it that they seem so opposed to organized Christianity specifically?
okay, well, a little fun fact of history. Back in the 17th century, Christianity became stupid popular to the point where they had about 200,000-ish. I'm missing by 50K either way, but I think it's 200,000-ish more. Christians, like samurai Christians. But because the clan leaders, the shogunate, and etc., all the leaders of Japan were terrified because Japan really melded well with Christianity because they had a big thing about having honor and loyalty to a singular lord. But to a human lord that could let you down, well, this was the nature of Japanese life. But then being introduced to a lord that would never let you down, would never fail you, would always be there for you, that clicked with a lot of Japanese samurai. And so they converted, and Christianity exploded to 200,000-ish people in only a matter of a couple of years, like less than 5 years. So that happened because their culture meshed really well. Now, it stopped meshing well when the leaders outlawed it, and they were afraid of its they're losing power over their people. So when you outlaw a religion, it has a tendency to collapse a bit more than if you didn't outlaw it. I know, strange concept. But with this development, it became very difficult for it to come back and make an impact. Now, later on in the modern era, Japan did not keep Christianity as banned. However, it is still a very small religion because it's considered to be disruptive. It's considered to be bad for society in a lot of ways. They also have a lot of their own, like, Shinto Buddhist kind of beliefs, or the kami, where everything has a god. The stones have a god, the trees have a god, the cats have a god, the dogs have a god, the grass has a god, that kind of a thing. Everything has a god imbued to it. And that's part of their honor society to some extent. But you can still have that honor society and still be a Christian. But it's a small and trying to bud part of the religious groups there. It's just Christianity seemed to be, because of like the proselytization and whatnot, it's seen to be as a disruptor of the society rather than a good thing. But anime's always had a religion fetish to some extent, where whether it be Catholic, whether it be a church in general, because I mean, one could argue that the garments that are white and gold are the same ones used by Anglicans, and they're not Catholic. They're high Protestant, right? Just because you see it doesn't mean it's all of a sudden about you. So this is a very strange concept, but that little detail about Japanese history is very important, I think, as to their relationship with this, because the imperial emperor, which is kind of a double whammy, the emperor of Japan, by the time we get to the 1940s, he has this thing where, like, I'm basically God. And that's the mentality until after World War II, and he's kind of reduced to a puppet, or a figurehead, I should say. And the modern Japanese way of life slowly begins to begin and pushes kind of away from the imperialistic movement. So, what do you get the different types of views on how they picture Christianity, Catholics, whatever the case might be? Well, it's going to come from it's going to come from some form of, I'm trying to think of the proper words, because this is in trying to understand what church could be related to what church would be very different. As for like things like gate, for example, when there's a gate that opens up in Japan and it leads to this fantasy world and this conflict between the kingdoms, the people in the fantasy realm, they have their own like religions and stuff like that. And then if you go through the gate into Japan, they have their religions as well. So if you were to show them both a church, they would operate very, very differently, but seemingly similarly. Because ultimately, when you have religions, they operate somewhat in a similar function. Doesn't mean their doctrines are the same. It doesn't mean they have the same teachings. Doesn't mean any of that's the same. But how they operate as an organization will be somewhat similar.
The answer might lie in the rise of new religious movement, otherwise known as cults. Japan has been beset by an...
I mean, technically speaking, a cult is not a religion because its foundation is purely off of control, not a deity being. And there's cult tendencies. So otherwise you could just, all religions are cults because this definition of cult. So I don't understand that, but
onslaught of cults in recent decades. Some of these cults are little more than vaguely religious or ideological social clubs, offering belonging to outcasts and a sense of community to the lonely. But others are significantly more sinister. Probably the most notorious of these new religious movements is the cult Om Shinrikyo, founded by Shoko Asahara. This was a doomsday cult that believed that the world was going to end soon due to a catastrophic war, and so their goal was to survive it by obeying Asahara, building a new world order atop the ashes once the war was over. Asahara made sure to incorporate Buddhism, Hinduism, and even some parts of Christianity into his cult's doctrine. And importantly for us, Asahara was the central authority figure in his cult. The reason for their notoriety is that in 1994 and 1995, Om Shinrikyo carried out 2 deadly attacks in Matsumoto and Tokyo respectively, utilizing chemical weapons. This cult also had a rival cult. Meet Happy Science. I can't say much, given that they're still around and have a track record of silencing people, but what I will say is that their belief system is a more confusing, sloppy, and convoluted mess of Christian, Islamic, and Buddhist syncretism, with their founder at the top of their authority structure as well, a man named Ryoho Okawa. There's a common belief that Happy Science's rivalry with Om Shinrikyo is what accelerated the latter's violent attacks. So, we can clearly see from these cults that organized religion in Japan has gotten a pretty bad rap. You can see the superficial similarities to organized Christianity very easily. The hierarchy, having one guy at the top, rigid rules and doctrines, it's all there. But this is all just about organized Christianity. Surely our unorganized brothers won't cause us any... Oh. So yeah. The third reason for evil churches in anime is Japanese Protestantism. Before you get up in arms, I want to clarify that this isn't an attack on anyone nor their faith. I'm only exploring the underlying ideas for why anime has so many evil churches, and I can't ignore the German hammer-wielding elephant in the room much as I'd like to in the spirit of charity. So how? How does Protestantism fit into all this? Well, it requires a little...
I mean, compared to your calculations, it doesn't. Because Protestantism doesn't really follow the other rules of gold and white outfits for the most part. It does for certain high Protestants like the Anglicans and some Lutherans and some Methodists. But I honestly can say I did not expect him to say Protestantism as his third option. Like, seriously, I know that Protestants, Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox have butted heads a lot in their history, but you can't blame Protestantism for Japan when you've already acknowledged that the majority of Christians, or the most amount of Christians in Japan, is like 1%. It's a very, very tiny percent. So it's already massively shrunk. Sorry. It's massively shrunk compared to anything else, whether it be atheistic, like the Buddhist more mentality, or kind of a Shinto Buddhist more. There are deities, but it's the elements of nature and everything like that. So you can't just go out and say, well, but my Protestants. What do Protestants have to do with this? The best that you could argue is that the Japanese looked outside of Japan and went to the European histories, which they do a lot for a lot of real world stuff. They love Germany, they love England, they love Italy, they love particular places in which they have a noticeable amount of anime based around. But how does Protestantism come to even like pop in your head is what I don't understand.
Little bit of history. Bear with me. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, Japan was a closed-off nation under the leadership of the Tokugawa shogunate. Around half a century before the shogunate came to power, missionaries like St. Francis Xavier and other Jesuits had brought Catholic Christianity to Japan. Japan didn't like that, so they closed off Japan from the rest of the world and viciously persecuted and martyred both missionaries and native-born converts. There were many of these, including those martyred during the Great Jenna Martyrdom and the Great Martyrdom of Edo, alongside the Augustan Recollects martyrs, the 16 Dominican martyrs, and a couple hundred others. Those who survived went into hiding and became known as the Kakure Christian, or the Hidden Christians. I would have preferred a cooler name like the Kageno.
I'm going to throw out a random guess, and it's probably wrong, but if it's right, I'm not going to be surprised. He's probably going to be related to when the Protestants showed up in Japan and were having them try to kick out Catholics in some shape or form. And maybe because Protestants and Catholics didn't get along back then because there was actual like fighting and stuff. Armored conflict is usually a good motivator.
But I suppose we don't always get what we want. Then came the Meiji Restoration, and with it, Japan opened itself back up to the outside world. When importing all sorts of Western philosophy and technology, Japan found itself receiving an influx of Protestants who embedded themselves into fields like education. Fast forward to World War II, where the heart of Catholicism in Japan for 200 long and arduous years, Nagasaki, was partially destroyed by the United States of America. Soon after, the Allies won the war, and Japan was promptly Americanized. Alongside other aspects of America's culture that entered
Americanized is a bit of a stretch.
Japan, a new wave of American Protestantism had arrived. Over time, and to the present day, Japan's small Christian population became majority Protestant. So, how does this add to the evil church problem? Well, there's many ways.
I mean, I would lay the blame for that on the Catholics for not going back in and doing anything. Like, if you're talking like hundreds of years after the Tokugawa shogunate, right? Hundreds of years. You get past that, you're now in modern day Japan. The Protestants show up, and apparently nobody else does, and you're like, it's Protestantism. You could have gone back. Like,
but I want to hone in on the scandal of schism. Schism is a split between two strongly opposed groups due to differences in opinion or belief. This is how you would define the relationship between Catholics and Protestants. Imagine, if you will, that 1% of your country's population is one religion, but within that 1%, there's a bigger group and a smaller group that refuse to associate with each other. They don't believe all the same things, they bicker regularly, and they refuse to worship together. Imagine now that the bigger group is part of your education.
Okay, first off, it's very rarely that they refuse to worship together. It's usually one group will not acknowledge the other's group worship is valid. That's usually how it runs instead. So that's not very accurate.
education system, and they focus more on community. These are well known to you, whereas the smaller group focuses more on more explicitly religious practice, and as a result, they're more of an abnormal curiosity to you. Now, if the bigger group, who you know, and the smaller group, who you don't, have a long-standing opposition to each other, who are you more likely to think is in the right? What about who's wrong? Maybe both of them are wrong. That's the scandal of schism, that it makes Christians look like a bunch of bickering hypocrites who preach
To be fair, schism is not limited to Christianity. Just throwing that out there.
love and forgiveness, but refuse to reconcile amongst themselves. This likely explains why there's so many religious hypocrites in various anime. There's definitely more ways that the Catholic-Protestant divide impacts how anime perceives the church, such as the accusations of greed levied against the church going all the way back to Martin Luther himself, but I think I've covered the biggest influence overall. So we've looked at the
But it doesn't have to be about that though. It could be literally just the position of power. The church having power in a kingdom, in like an isekai or whatever it is, like a sentence of a bookworm. The church having power is because people give it power. They give it money. They believe they're going to have some semblance of an afterlife, etc. afterwards because it's misused. This isn't how all Christianity is. In fact, most of Christianity isn't that way. But to say that a church or a religious organization is somehow immediately tied to Catholicism. Now, Catholicism's one of the larger, or is it Christianity's the largest religion in the world, and Catholicism's a chunk of that, right? Like it's split into the major points as a third. So you got Eastern Orthodox Catholicism and Protestantism. But that's only a third. And you're just assuming, well, they wear fancy white robes, they have gold coloring and white coloring, and they have this, they have that. Therefore, it must be about the Catholics. It might be in some instances. Maybe some people grab their inspiration from it. But if you're like, I need a religion, where do I grab said religion? Well, what are the more popular religions in the world? Oh, it's Christianity. Oh, okay, if it's Christianity, then it must be easy for me to pull from an inspiration. It's a very easy thing to go to.
3 major reasons for why anime has an evil church problem. These philosophical, cultural, and religious concepts have come together to give Japanese creatives a generally negative impression.
Also, crazy concept. The Japanese don't understand Christianity. What? They don't understand it. Therefore, they kind of just pick a title, plagiarize it, and then throw it in. But it's technically not about Christianity. It's just, I needed an organization. Oh, what's an easy organization that can constantly combat the kingdom, the empire, the state itself, whatever whether it's fantasy setting or not. It's typically fantasy setting. But what could I use that would be a natural balance? Well, religion. Religion is often at odds with the state. Unless the state is the religion. But that'd be atheism. So, if you're looking at it from a perspective of, well, here's some issues, I'm like, well, there's also other reasons as to why it could be that thing. And I don't think he's going into that because, I don't know, I'm feeling more like, but my Protestant's bad is like the go-to rather than just saying, there's lots of reasons as why this could be the case.
Of organized Christianity, thereby leading many of them to write their fictional churches as corrupt, hypocritical, elitist, and overall immoral organizations meant to enrich themselves, control the masses with arbitrary rules, and maintain an unjust status quo.
There are historical uses of this. You pointed out to a couple of them as just the cults in Japan. If you have just the cults in Japan doing that, well, obviously they're going to think, well, they're gaining power, they're gaining influence, they're doing this, they're doing that. It's just another religion. Now, how do you want it to look? Well, if you're in a fantasy setting and you have castle walls, well, that's a medieval thing. Like European medieval thing. Or medieval Europe, however you want to say it. So if that's the case, what religion was predominant in Europe? Oh, look at that. It's Christianity. Like, it's almost like it's reaching. And it's not necessary to reach. You could just say, hey, it's simple as it's a medieval setting, medieval weaponry, European medieval weaponry specifically, most of the time, because they'll use long swords, broadswords, bastard swords, shields, pike, spears, maces, flails, you name it. They use a bunch of crossbows, bows, all of this in heavily European style. If they're using heavy European influences, what's the European organized religion? Christianity. That's that. It's not necessarily inherently because we don't like the Catholics. They probably don't understand Catholicism or Protestantism or Eastern Orthodox. Definitely not Eastern Orthodox, because it's not exactly that popular in Japan. But the point being, if they don't understand it, they're just making it up. And if they're making it up, they're like, well, we needed a second organization. There are some anime in which the church is the only force countering the state, and it's a good force. But we didn't bring up any of those for some reason. Maybe he hasn't watched those particular animes. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But there are other things. You could do a little bit more research. And he obviously did a lot of research because he's putting a lot of visuals from a lot of different animes into the video. It's a very nicely done video. It's better production quality than I can muster because I just don't have that talent. But it does have a bit of a problem when it becomes more of a victim thing. Like, oh, the Catholics are the victims. The Catholics are just what were there for them to see, and they misunderstand it. That's fine. You could just say the Japanese have a misunderstanding Christianity thing. Sure. But there are instances with the Christian church in which people got into positions of power and abused that power. This is nothing new. Humans are humans. The human condition exists, and it falls even upon the religious. That's just how it is.
Whoa, so what now? What's the takeaway? Well, for one, you need to understand that these depictions are inspired by a total mischaracterization of the Catholic Church. In reality, the church is the
It doesn't have to be a miscategorization of the Catholic Church. It could just be they don't understand because it's not the religion they use.
Body of Christ, not a merely human institution. It was founded by Jesus Christ our Lord with the Apostle Peter.
If it's not a merely human thing, then why are you complaining that the Catholic Church is being bothered about this? I don't get it.
As its foundation. The church is composed of the Christian faithful in communion with Peter's successor and the bishops in communion with him. It's got priests and bishops who are referred to as Father, yes, but this isn't to put them on a pedestal. Rather, they're meant to serve the people of God, guiding them as fathers, just as St. Paul did when he told the Corinthians, I became your father in Christ Jesus through the gospel. The church is the bride of Christ, whose mission as the mother of the faithful is to lead sinners to holiness through Christ Jesus, administering the means by which God bestows his grace upon his children, all in an effort to fulfill the Great Commission, to make disciples of all nations. There have, admittedly, been many occasions when the hierarchy of the church has failed on moral matters. All manner of scandal, greed, corruption, adultery, pride, and power plays have plagued the church from the time.
I said that. That's how we got to where we is at now.
Time of the New Testament to the present day, though this is to be expected when it's made up of sinners. There is none righteous, no, not one, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The Lord Jesus once told the apostles that they would sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. 12. This means that Judas was counted in that plan. But just like how the corruption and betrayal of Judas,
I mean, questionable. So, I'm not going to touch it for reasons I already mentioned at the beginning of the video.
this doesn't invalidate the truth of Christianity, the evil of certain bishops, priests, or even popes doesn't invalidate the truth that the church is the body of Christ.
Okay, I'm going to summarize this really freaking quick because I had this conversation with people before. The actions of people who claim to be a part of an organized religious group do not inherently express the doctrines of that group. For example, if you make a religion about pie and somebody goes out and eats pizza, it does not mean that the religion is about pizza. It means that one person strayed from the path away from pie and went to pizza. Ironically, pizza is a pie. Different story, different context. Probably not the best analogy. It's just what popped in my head. So, normal like pumpkin pie or apple pie, or cherry pie, whatever kind of pie you're thinking about, versus pizza pie. Very different. But one could argue that if somebody was to go out and commit the heinous crime or sin of pizza pie instead of pumpkin pie, apple pie, cherry pie, etc., it doesn't mean that the religion itself told them to do that. It meant they went outside on their own. It's this very easy concept. For some reason, everybody misses it, and it drives me nuts. But to keep it short and simple, when you see a believer of a religion or a viewpoint or whatever, it doesn't mean that the person or the organization the person is a part of teaches that. It could teach quite the opposite. Like, for example, you could say, hey, well, this church over here is participating in kitty diddling, and they're protecting the people involved. You're not going to find in the Christian religion anything that says to do that or that supports that. If anything, it absolutely 100% condemns it. So there's no point in saying, well, Christians are in favor. It literally does not exist. You can't manufacture it into existence. Now, what they did still existed, and they did it under a position of authority, but that does not mean that the actual actions are prescribed by the church. It's a common misconception. It's like, oh, I stopped believing in God because somebody did a bad thing. I was like, oh, okay. Does their faith teach that bad thing? Well, no. Then why does it matter? That means that their faith has absolutely nothing to do with their actions. They went outside of the faith to do those actions. So that's exactly what this is. Oh, well, this happened. It doesn't matter. Yes, bad people do bad things. Guess what? Non-religious bad people do bad things. They're bad people. It's part of the group.
Now that we know all this, it's important to ask, what do we do with all this information? My answer
is nothing, because none of it makes any sense, and I don't know why you made this video.
is pretty simple, honestly. Unfortunately, we live on the opposite side of the world from where anime and manga are made. We can't exactly rally against this sort of mischaracterization at the hands of Japanese creatives. We can certainly attempt to reach out privately and respectfully, but the odds that anything will change on this front are virtually zero. Instead, I think it would do us well to recognize that these depictions are being written by people who don't have an intimate awareness of what organized Christianity is like.
I said that already. They don't know what they're talking about because it's not a religion they're familiar with. That's okay. You're not supposed to take this seriously. It's an anime, and it's most of the time in a fantastical world in which their deity is a pretty pathetic deity. I argue this all the time when I talk to people about anime. The deities are blatantly just underpowered and pathetic. Not gonna lie. Every single one of them would get crushed by the Christian deity. Whoopity-doo. It's a story. It's a storytelling process. Eru Iluvatar is going to wipe the floor with anything on the board, on the page, everything. Just absolutely destroy it. But the point is they just made it for a storytelling perspective. They don't understand the concepts that the West typically utilizes in that regard. Heck, half of the West doesn't even comprehend the idea of that because they don't understand it, or they're afraid of it, or whatever the case might be. It doesn't really even matter. The point is, the Japanese don't get it. I mentioned this earlier, so why do you still talk about it?
They can only really go off of what they find in...
Because I think he just feels... He feels like the church is threatened by the anime, which it should have no reason to be. And two, because it's threatened, it needs to reiterate its position and its power and prowess. Like, it's kind of like, oh, someone's dunking on my sports ball team. Let me go pronounce my sports ball team's wonders and great deeds. It's like, but why? I mean, if the Catholic Church wants to show up in Japan and start a whole freaking movement, go for it. But don't blame it on the Protestants. Don't blame it on Nietzsche. Don't blame it on cults. It's your own movements. Your own actions are going to accommodate to that.
Their research or what they hear from people they know. It sucks for us, but an awareness of the situation we're in as Christian anime fans is critical if we are going to avoid being led astray by wrong ideas. Remember, your faith in Jesus Christ.
Why would watching an anime about a corrupt bishop, corrupt pope, corrupt priest, whatever, sway anyone's religion? If they're that brittle in their beliefs, they're not technically Christians because they have absolutely no confidence in the thing they believe. That's a pretty poor bar as a standard.
is more important than what a non-Christian accuses your church of, and this goes double for the media that you consume. This has been the 9th episode of Piercing, my commentary on media from a Catholic point of view. Like the video, hype the video, subscribe, ring the bell, you know the drill. If you want to hang out with Catholics like me, even if you're not quite Catholic yourself, check out the Catholic Diocese of Discord and tell them I sent you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.
All right. Ultimate conclusion. I have no idea why that video was made. I mean, you could have based it not even off the church and based it purely on a spiel about people taking advantage and moving up in political power and whatever, and using that power, whether it be through an organized religion, a cult, a state-sponsored campaign to conquer someone, whatever the situation, whatever they do, they utilize that potential to be put in power and take action with it, and you would literally just cover the entire same stuff. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a church. And again, not in every church is it that the church is evil. There's lots that the church is not evil. It's just that's not what he focused on because it doesn't help his agenda in that, I guess. I'm not sure what exactly his point was outside of making the Catholics look good. But then he basically went to a whole bunch of instances in which they weren't Catholics. Helsing is the one he might actually have a chance on. But you could have argued differently for that if you wanted to go that route. But everything else was basically its own fake religion. Oh, well, it has a fake religion. Why is this Catholic? And it's like, but it's not. It's made up religion. There's lots of made up religions. It's not about Catholic just because it's religion. There's other things other than religion of Catholicism. Like, I don't understand. It's not my spiel in that regard. So I think I'll just end it with, hey, if you're taking offense to it and the shoe fits, maybe it fits. If you're taking offense to it and the shoe doesn't necessarily fit, you're probably reaching or projecting something inside that bothers you. I don't know. I'm not going to say the person's over the top. I'm not going to say he's off his rocker. I'm not going to say any of that stuff. What I am going to say is this was entirely unnecessary. This is not quite as bad as free run demons are not evil. That really bad take was really, really stupid that I did with Crimson Law. So check out his channel to go find that. But yeah, I feel like I just wasted half my life right there. I want that back. I want that time back. It was disappointing, but it was a live reaction. So thanks everybody for sticking around and watching with me. Check out the descriptions for the original video if you want to watch it on your own. I mean, you just watched it with me, so you don't technically have to. But if you would like to go check out his other content, I'll have the link down there for that. As well as check the description for Discord, Twitter, /X, whatever. Discord is my preference to hang out and whatnot. Slowly growing. It's not crazy taking off, but hey, it's got some fun stuff. You got memes, you got Lord of the Rings RTS games that are free. And then also just keeping up with live stream schedules. You get to vote for what you want to see me play in a live stream. It could be more fun than that. Currently, I'm going through the Lord of the Rings games, starting in the Game Boy Advance game era, and then working my way up to the console eras. So that'll be fun. If you are new to the channel, thank you for stopping by. If you are a returnee, I appreciate your consistent patronage. Also, check out in the description other content creators that might be something of interest to you. It's the way I can support them. And you'll find Crimson Law, you'll find Matt, you'll find a lot of different people down there. You probably remember the White Cloaks, Pips, Prophet the Dragon, all that fun stuff. And also below that, you can find a list of businesses that I think are worth supporting if you're in the area for those types of things, whether it be mods or PCs. Check them out. I am not sponsored. I just think that they're cool businesses. So thanks everybody for sticking around. And remember, my friends, walk in the light.